Thank you very much for inviting me. It's very nice to be here and collaborate with this wonderful institute, within this wonderful institute. So I will present you some work. Actually, most of the work you see is not work is done directly here in collaboration, but it's definitely has been inspired and inspiring some of the things we have done here together, and we are now doing. I will get to that at the end. So I will show you some of our work that we are doing in a group that is centered in Paris, even though we have collaborators internationally. I put out the names because it's important to know that I'm just one of a larger group of people doing this work that you will be seeing. The people that are highlighted, we will see actually their contributions and their work throughout the talk. We have a group of a very interdisciplinary group, which has been a real pleasure and a very important lesson on how difficult it is sometimes with working with engineers, scientists, dancers, philosophers, trying to collaborate and each find our way of doing our respective research and a common research together, and this is very challenging. One of the things I've learned through this process, I'm trying to kind of synthesize with this title, Improvising Science. So this, I like it because it has this ambiguity, like a Chomsky ambiguity. So improvising science can mean the scientific study of improvisation. You will see a little bit of that, and that's kind of also what we're doing here over the last few days. But also, it also means a way of doing science. So I would say improvisation as an epistemic model. And I want to explain what that means, because that sometimes at first looks a bit unclear maybe for people, especially because when you open the dictionary and try to see what the word improvising in English at least means, usually this is actually one of such definitions from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So to improvise, and you can read. And this is, I think, for many people that you ask intuitively, they probably will go, especially people who don't themselves improvise in the artistic sense of the word, music or dance or theater, they'll probably say something like that. And for me, that has been, this does not capture actually what I sense that I do, or when I improvise, or when I'm also a dancer and improviser, and so I have some experience of the last 20 or so years. So here is a slightly different definition. This is not a full definition. This is just one idea. I even tried to get it translated into Japanese. It's actually, the French is very nice, attendre l'inattendu, because it has this double meaning again. It's this waiting for what, in English it would be waiting for the unwaited for, which is kind of a paradox, right? How can you wait for something that is not waited for? And that place, I think, is what makes improvisation interesting, this tension, that place. And here are three of my teachers over the last, again, 20 or so years, Steve Paxton and Lisa Nelson in the US, Tanaka Min here in Japan, and all of them have their own techniques, which have their names and their backgrounds and their history, but I would say that all of them, in a way, are techniques for waiting. So what they are teaching us, what dancing for them is how can you wait for the unwaited for? So that sounds, okay, that's very interesting. This artist, they do these kind of weird things, right? So here is a very nice quote from Reinberger, who is a scientist originally that then became historian of science. The fundamental problem of science consists in the fact that one does not exactly know what one does not know. This is kind of the same problem put into, described by a scientist or by a researcher, epistemologist of science. And here is a second philosopher I like very much. This is the fox from The Little Prince. And the fox from The Little Prince says to the prince, one only knows the things that one tames. So then again, it's a way for me, again, to say the same problem. So how can we know something we don't know yet? How can we prepare ourselves to know what we know, what we don't know yet? And here is again one of the a short text again. I think it's worthwhile reading from Reinberger. the goal is ultimately to acquire new knowledge, and yet by definition, whatever is truly new cannot be anticipated. There are therefore limits to our capacity to bring it about. Whatever is truly new must simply happen. It must take place. In an experiment, a researcher creates an empirical structure or environment that enables him to act in this state of not knowing about the unknown. So again, as both a scientist and an improviser, a dance improviser, I feel I recognize this technique, this way of doing it. This is, I think, a particular way of doing science, and maybe even the main way, even though the problem that Reinberger brings about is that often when we have to write down our articles in science, we have to tell everyone how we knew ahead of time what we are going to find. And today the problem in science, in grant writing, and now even in science publication, we have to tell ahead of time what we are going to find. And this is a big problem. Now, this is not just ideas. Here's an example, a classic example of a paper at MIT when I was doing my PhD there. This was one of our papers that were this is how cognitive neuroscience was started, with Latwin and Matuana's work on the optical nerve in the frog. And what's really fascinating, it's really nice to read it, especially there is a follow-up paper a few years later by Latwin, who is saying, I won't read it, but basically they did not know what they're looking for. They just moved. If you know the experiment, they basically had magnets on a screen and they were moving them around with shapes, and then they were waiting to hear the nerve activating. And they did not have expectation what, and by just playing around, they did not record anything, they just listened, and whenever they listened, they got a sense of what the neurons were doing or sensitive for. They discovered groups and kinds of neurons that are sensitive to movement, continuous movement, appearance, and so forth, disappearance. And that was done exactly through this approach of waiting for the unwaited for. So again, this is basically techniques for waiting. And so now I'll tell you a little bit about our work. So our research project is trying to do both those things. So both you'll see we are trying to study improvisation, but we're also trying to develop ways of doing it which incorporate this idea of the not knowing. We're also very inspired by, it's nice to see Matuana appearing earlier, because Francisco Varela was Matuana's student when they developed together the an active framework. And this is, I call the Varela triangle, which combines neuroscience, body-based practice. If you know Francisco Varela's work, he was working on meditation. We are working with dance, and then philosophy, particularly phenomenology in his case. So joint improvisation in dance mean when multiple people play together. We just saw some beautiful videos of what I assume was joint improvisation in music, and I think those are very, very similar activities in the sense that interest us, and you'll see some examples. We have also worked with music. So the main question we're asking is, what are the mechanisms that underlie intersubjective coordination? And we think that this is not a question that is specific to dance improvisation, of course. It happens every day, in every interaction we have, social, professional, personal, and so forth, more or less creative, more or less artistic. But we think that joint improvisation, particularly in dance, is an excellent way of studying it, because we have almost lab conditions. We are in a studio, it's very minimal, there's no language, we can control a lot of the parameters, but it is still an ecological activity. So it's not a strange experiment that people are going like, oh, I have to fake interaction. This is actually interactions that people train and enjoy doing in their daily life, dancing together. For us, this is another French again. I'm not a French native speaker, but I like sometimes French for some nice lexical surprises. For example, the word expérience in French means both experiment, like we do, but also experience. And so for us, what we design, what we call gigs, group improvisation games, want to be both an experiment and an experience. And we have some design principles. I won't go through them right now, but those are certain design principles for our small protocols that then we test and we try to develop incrementally. And I'm going to give you, so this is an article you can, if you are interested, you can read more in detail about the philosophical framework and more in details one of the examples I go through now. So I just want to give you, I don't have much time, so I just want to give you one concrete example of one of those gigs, one of those group improvisation games, and I'll start off on this work on the mirror game. So you might know, you can actually, we can actually do a small experiment. If you have a neighbor next to you, you can just turn to them, and you can put your finger in front of each other. So you just do like that. I invite you all. It's really harmless. Just point, just have a finger in front of, you can turn back if you don't have anyone. You can be in a distance, that's wonderful, that's a great experiment. And just one of you decides and they start moving the finger and the other one follows. Come on, invite you, try. Harmless. So I lead and my partner follows. And then we change the roles. So now my partner is leading and I follow. And now without stopping, nobody is leading, we are both following. Nobody is leading. We don't know who is the leader. There's no assigned leader. We just see what happens. This is waiting for the unwaited for. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the brave ones who have improvised together. So this is a small example, and this is originally Noi et al. Did it with a machine that has just one dimension. My collaborator and good friend Tommy Himberg in Finland turned it exactly to what we just did. So this is a motion capture of what some of us just did now. And again, what they were looking in both Noi's work and Lior Noi's work in Israel and Tommy Himberg's work in Finland, they were comparing the following and leading that we have done to this special condition where there is no follower and leader, when we are both waiting for the unwaited for. And what they find is very interesting is that when there is a follower and a leader, you can see the in blue is the leader doing very nice kind of, this is a very nice smooth movement, but you can see the follower, and you might have felt it doing it, that the follower needs to correct, right? And this is called the jitter. So this is the red. And you can see the red is jittering with the blue. But when there is no leader and follower, officially, there is like a perfect harmony, if you want, and there's both look like leaders, both look totally jitterless, and very, at least in the macro structure, when you look at the microstructure, it becomes more interesting, but the macro structure, it seems that there is no one that leads and one that follows. We found that very interesting, and as I said, Tommy is a close collaborator in everything you'll be seeing now, but we have a problem, and if you know a little bit about social cognition studies, most of those studies look at dyads, two people doing something together, which is a very important model, but once we go out into the world, we find that many times we do things with more than one other person. And the problem is, now I'm talking as a social cognitive scientist, let's say, is that it's not always the case that what happens in a dyad replicates or is representative of what happens with larger groups. And so we really wanted to look at what happened with bigger groups, and there's relatively little work on that and very few actual paradigms to study it. And so what we created was the 4-person mirror game. So this is 4 people doing the game we just did in 2. So here are different, this is all motion capture. So this is different, it's all the same dance, simultaneous, just different views of the same 4 people dancing. What's interesting with this game is that it's impossible, right? So if you have just one person in front of you, you can mirror. But the moment you have 4 people, mirroring is always, unless we all do this, then we'll always have to make choices. And so the game becomes unsolvable and hence more interesting, more improvisational. But still we can measure and we can still look at the dynamics. And what we did in these pilots that I'll show you some data from, is we first do this game with participants, then they do some open improvisation score with dance, and then they do it again, and what we're interested is in the difference. So how the fact of improvising together changes the way you do the mirror game as a pro. What you can see, I think it's pretty clear. I hope you have those extra screens. So you can see the pre-improv to the post-improv, and even without any statistics, just looking at those graphs, you can see how it changes. So you can see that after having improvised together in a kind of open, playful way, with a kind of a game, people are becoming much more tuned to each other. Okay, the curves here are much less similar than they are here. And also structure starts to emerge. They're doing interesting things together in particular moments. This shows basically the same idea, looking at the cross-correlation. I won't go, if you're interested in the questions, more details about the analysis, we can talk about it. This kind of makes the same, this is just showing different, so I was saying, when you look at two persons, usually you can say, okay, one is leading, one is following. Or the same, or together. When you look at four people, you can start seeing a whole more complex kinds of interactions. For example, here one person started, and then the three others joined, more or less together. Here is more complex, there's a complex movement, some people follow it, some not, and so forth. So we can start seeing, when we look at four persons, much more complex dynamics of interaction than we look in dyads. The problem that we did a second study, we changed the game in the middle. The game that I showed you before was a simultaneous game. We had to all move together, all the dancers. Here, the dancers had to do turn-taking score. I won't go into details, but what turn-taking is like a conversation. When I speak, you wait. When you speak, I wait. So the global overall is a coordinated interaction, but not simultaneous. And what happened, I won't go again, this is some, you can just see pre and post, but you will not see, it's hard to kind of from that to see the difference, but actually there was not a big difference between the pre and post. Unlike what we saw before, there was not a big change. And we were kind of wondering what happened, why in the second experiment, the improvisation did not make people more synchronous after. And of course, our hypothesis out of doing that was maybe something about the kind of improvisation. So as I said, we did two different kind of improvisation, so we were saying, let's test that. So also we had a difference between expertise and experts and novices, but I'll put that for the side at the moment. I want to mainly concentrate on this issue of synchronicity versus sequentiality or turn-taking. So this is a study we are writing up now that we did in Finland last spring. So basically we had people, the same idea. This is now with only two persons, so they do the mirror game, then they do music improvisation, and then they do the mirror game again, but only two persons. This is a bit misleading, the slide. And they had three conditions for improvisation. Either they improvised alone, they improvised with another person but turn-taking, I will show you, or improvised simultaneously. Again, I will show you. So, and then they did a game. Again, this is the whole protocol. Again, I will save you the details. I will just show you turn-taking. Hopefully this would work. So, does that play? Can you hear? So I should explain, this is motion capture. They are playing on wood xylophones that are pentatonic scale. So you don't see the xylophone because they're not captured, but you can imagine them. They're standing in front of each other. They're definitely enjoying that. So that's the turn taking. Let me show you the entrainment. I hope that works. So here they are asked in the score to play in the same time. Differently, but okay, so it's just an idea, and just to give, this is just a solo player. In order to make the solo condition interesting, we showed them in a silent movie, and they were doing kind of the soundtrack for the silent movie. This one you probably won't read very well, but you get the idea. So we have these three conditions. I hope this is clear. They do a mirror game, like you just did with the fingers before. Then they do the game, the music improvisation, and then do the mirror game. Again, we compare the mirror games. So I'll go quick. So this is just, so this is the same two participants after doing the, so this is before, and this is after, having done the solo condition. So they've each played alone and music, and then they did the mirror game again. So this is exactly the same game we just played a few minutes ago. And we can see the same, we won't have time to see the differences. This is the same game before and after having done the entrainment condition, playing the music together. It's worth, if you had more time, it would be worthwhile seeing, because you can actually see the results I'll be showing you in a moment. The quantitative ones are pretty visible in the video, but it requires some time that we might not have. So let me go directly to the results. I'll show you this graph. This is the easiest. So you're looking now at cross correlation, so how similar the two finger dances are, the two fingers. And we have the turn taking before and after, solo before and after, and entrainment. And what you can see is that when they did a solo music improvisation, they're even less similar to each other after. Nothing changes in the turn taking, but in the entrainment condition, indeed, they are becoming more synchronized. So what we are seeing is that a musical improvisation together, when you are playing together at the same time, makes you afterwards also more synchronous in this finger dance, which is kind of what we were expecting. So in that sense, it's kind of more traditional science this moment. So it kind of confirmed our predictions. To get even a bit more crazy, now we're having this unfortunately I don't have the animation to show you, so this is just a video of the game. So this is 5 people playing, but now they're not even asked to mirror each other. We opened it, we call it a finger dance, they're just dancing together. And this allows us to do, of course, now cross-correlation is not necessary. This is just some data you can see. So this is just how the cross-correlation pattern between two of them while they're doing that. This is, of course, those kind of analysis, linear analysis are limited, and we are getting to the limit of their usefulness. So now we are developing a non-linear toolbox, basically based on joint recurrence analysis to deal with these kind of issues, because the kind of similarities are not necessarily temporal, are not linear, they're not necessarily, and so we need some more sophisticated tools. Okay, so this is a little bit about our work. I'll end just saying that my presence, this is the second year I'm here. Xiaowei invited me last year. Together we organized what I thought was a very nice moment about interdisciplinarity around this notion of ma, or what we kind of translated as the in-between. And that was a really beautiful time. I saw one of the bonsai gardens still out in one of the corridors. So I think there are still physical remains of our time here, which is nice, of this ephemeral experience. Those are the small gardens we all built, stone gardens, moss gardens. And this year we kind of said, okay, how can we go further with this question? So we are kind of looking, we have spent the last 3 days developing materials to study the perception of mind dance improvisation. So and many thanks to all the wonderful, wonderful people here in NTT that have been very important part, otherwise it wouldn't have happened in this very short time. So just a quick video of, this is just a demo, some quick recording of screen we did before yesterday, using the Kitamura's lab setup of 3 dancers dancing together. And I can just leave it on while you have questions, so you can just watch the video. If you don't have any questions or you're not interested, it's fun to look. Thank you.